Welcome to this Back Alpha web series. My name is Dan Dombroski, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Andrew Davies. Andrew's the CEO of Syniverse, and he brings years of experience in the telecommunications space. Syniverse has gone public via SPAC with M3-Brigade acquisition. Now, whether we recognize it or not, Syniverse is already embedded into our everyday lives, allowing for mobile communication. Andrew walks me through the framework for this communication, how they got here, and what the opportunities look like going forward. Please enjoy my discussion with Andrew Davies. Now, Andrew, you've held numerous positions within telecommunications firms, and through all your success, what do you see as the most difficult lesson that you've had to learn so far?
That's a great question. Wow, it's a long time since I've been asked that, actually. I guess it's a combination of patience and having to work through a large team of people rather than just do it all myself. And for me, that lesson was a very rapid lesson that I had to learn when I was in a senior finance role in Vodafone Japan. Okay, so I got tapped on the shoulder to go and be the SVP of financial planning and analysis for Vodafone Japan. And of course, you get put into an ecosystem where you don't speak the language, there's significant cultural barriers, but more importantly and more practically, you actually can't understand what's coming out of the ledger system and what's coming out of the reporting architecture. And I, at the time, before I went, was a very hands-on individual. So that really forced me in a heartbeat to learn very rapidly how to be more effective by working through people rather than doing it all myself. That's probably the single biggest lesson I've learned in my career.
And what about those cultural differences? Can you cite an example of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, the Japanese are very formal, don't want to rock the boat, and there's a lot of what they call nemawashi, which is pre-socialization that has to go on in order to get to a decision. I mean, they really take decisions by consensus rather than having the CEO be the sole decision maker, if you will. So meetings would take 3-4 times the length of time that I was used to in a UK or a US based environment. And then what makes it even more challenging is just about every single meeting that you're in, you're having simultaneous language translation both ways. So you're walking around with an earpiece almost permanently stuck in your ear, and you've got your translator literally attached to the hip with you. So you're in meetings and you're having to really tune out the language that you can't hear because you need to focus on what your translator is saying into your right ear. And it's a very challenging environment to be in from that perspective. And it's, just to illustrate, it's really challenging for the translators themselves because it's such an intense work environment for them. And of course, the translators have got to be really up to speed with all of the terminology, all of the acronyms that we use in a telco landscape. So they're very intelligent about the business as well. And for them to be translating for 20 minutes at a time was a real stretch. So if you're in a big leadership meeting, we would have literally a crew of translators that would take it in turns.
That sounds exhausting for them.
It's exhausting all around. Used to sleep half the weekend.
So you're highlighting that bureaucratic aspect of it, as well as that you're the primary decision maker. How have you blended those together to become this effective leader that you've turned into today?
Again, a great question. Look, it's a question of constantly evolving over time and having a very change-centric mindset. I mean, I've got a number of attributes, right? Like most people do. I've also got my deficiencies and my learning opportunities still. But I think probably my strongest attribute actually is the change-centric mindset that I have. So you just have to always evolve. And at the end of the day, it comes down to respect, right? You want to be able to treat people as you would want others to treat you. Right? You've got to be able to develop the respect for people and have them respect you and want to walk through fire for you. And those are lessons I learned as well playing sport. So I played sport at a pretty high level. I didn't quite get to kind of the major leagues, if you will, but I played rugby until my early 30s, and I was kind of a AAA equivalent baseball player in rugby. So, and again, rugby, very physical sport. You've got your teammates have got to have your back at all times. Otherwise, if they don't, you're going to get damaged.
Right. It's unfortunate that some people never get that opportunity to learn that lesson. But yeah, outside of Syniverse, what do you see as the most impressive technology or business models in recent years that's intrigued you or really impressed you?
Wow. What's impressed me? Look, I think it's, you look at what's happened in the last decade with the app-based economy. I was there when at Verizon Wireless, when we were launching the 4G LTE network, December 2010. We first to bring LTE to the market. And we had no idea that 4G smartphones were going to bring along this explosion of innovation and have the app-based digital native economy that we have today.
And that really ties into your appointment as CEO at Syniverse now. Could you tell me more about what the model is, what the business is at Syniverse?
Yeah, sure. Look, so Syniverse, it's a really interesting business model. Does a lot of what you might term the sight unseen work within the entire communications ecosystem, quite frankly. We've got a 3+ decade heritage as being the trusted neutral intermediary and almost the central nervous system for large mission critical parts of the entire communication value chain. So yeah, at our heart, what we provided and what we still provide is interoperability and connectivity between all of the carrier networks. Now that might not be intuitive to most people because they may think that, pick any two networks who we have as our customers, they may think that the AT&T network and the Verizon Wireless network seamlessly communicate with each other. That actually isn't the case. Right? You should think of carrier networks as almost being like large islands in the middle of an ocean. And if you've got somebody on the AT&T island that wants to communicate with somebody on the Verizon island, we provide the connectivity in between them. And then if you want to go and visit the Verizon island and you're an AT&T customer, we also provide all of the authentication, all of the verification to enable you to use your AT&T phone on the Verizon island and enjoy the same kind of use as though you were still on your home AT&T network. So that's how we were founded, essentially. And then what's more, building on that analogy, if you would travel to the Verizon island and you then return home to your AT&T island, you're going to get a bill from AT&T for all of your monthly services. Amongst that will be all of the usage that you had when you were on the Verizon island. And we enable that because we capture all the transaction flows and we do all the clearing and settlement for the carrier industry globally. And similarly, we would then enable Verizon to charge the AT&T island for the privilege of hosting you on their island. Right? So we not just enable the connectivity and the interoperability on a global scale for all of this roaming, but we enable all of the carriers to monetize it effectively. And then that gives us permission to play in A2P enterprise messaging, this heritage that we have as being the trusted neutral intermediary. So we then are one of the largest providers of A2P enterprise messaging on the planet. So what does that mean? Simply put, let me give you some illustrative use cases. If you received a text message with an authentication code from your bank when you're doing online transactions, that's powered by Syniverse. If you receive a delivery reschedule message from from a logistics provider, that's also powered by Syniverse. If you receive airport gate change notifications, that's powered by Syniverse, and so on and so forth. So we're a critical, a mission critical player right at the heart of the modern global digital economy. And our secret sauce is we've built and perfected the world's largest private IPX, so inter-packet network exchange network, that has got unrivaled distribution, speed, capacity, latency, etc. Let me just give you a couple of data points. So that network on an annual basis carries more than 3.3 exabits of data traffic. Now, that might not sound like a lot, or you might not know what that means, right? It's actually 10,000 times the data stored in the entire Library of Congress. And we process that amount every single year. We process more than 2.2 trillion billable transactions within our network. We carry over 1 trillion messages annually. So the scale and the seamlessness that we operate that scale at is truly unprecedented within the industry.
I appreciate you giving that context, especially within the scale of just how big this is, and with the analogy. I do want to paint a clear picture of what the business segments actually look like and what their contribution is to the revenue.
Yeah, sure. So we've got two major segments, a carrier segment and an enterprise segment. And at the end of Q4, the total revenue weighting was roughly 55 carrier, 45 enterprise. But enterprise is growing at a far faster rate of knots than carrier. So a year previously, that would have been, say, 65 carrier, 35 enterprise. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of how rapidly enterprise is growing relative to the carrier segment. So what do we do? Well, within the carrier segment, as I just alluded to earlier, the foundation is really the IPX network and what that does in terms of enabling all of the global roaming traffic. Okay, and then building on that with outsourced carrier solutions, which is the products categories that we have that provide all of the clearing and settlement capability to enable the carriers to monetize the traffic. And then we also have a messaging solutions business within our carrier segment, which basically runs the majority of the world's cross-network messaging traffic. So let me kind of dwell a little bit longer on each of those. So in IPX, we have roughly a 40% global market share. Within clearing and settlement, we run about 80% of the world's global clearing and settlement revenues. In messaging solutions and in P2P messaging, we have roughly an 80% share of the market in North America and about a 50% share of the market outside of North America. And what I mean there is, if you're a Verizon wireless customer, again, use two of our largest customers, and you're sending a text message to somebody on the AT&T network, that will be powered by Syniverse. That will traverse our messaging platforms. Okay. So that's kind of a very high-level snapshot of carrier. In enterprise, it really is about enterprise messaging traffic. So it's A2P messaging traffic, both what we term short code and long code. So the difference is short code is a text message that you get that's come from a 5-digit number. By long code, we mean an A2P message that lands on your device that's actually come from a real 10-digit phone number. There's significant advantages to 10-digit long code traffic because first of all, it enables a much richer form of communication once you've received the initial message. So you can actually call that number back if you wanted to. You can interact, you can send messaging back and forth to that 10-digit number. You can't do that with a short code. All you can basically do with a short code number is respond yes, no, or stop. So you really don't get any rich downstream communication once the initial message has been terminated with the consumer. And then we also have CPaaS. So CPaaS, in our terminology, is the ability to run omni-channel communications, not just A2P messaging, but email, WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, potentially video calling, etc. And then the ability to, as the industry calls it, to orchestrate that, which means move in one set of customer interactions, move between a pure chat with it, or to email, to voice call, etc., depending on what's appropriate at that particular time of the customer interaction.
Can you give more detail? Oh, I'm sorry. Please continue.
No, I was going to say, and we are seeing significant growth in the enterprise segment in particular. I referenced that earlier with the change in revenue mix just in the last 12 months. And that's because corporates of all shapes and sizes are increasingly turning to enterprise messaging to drive their digital transformations. It's customer experience, it's employee experience. We've even got some customers now using enterprise messaging to drive internal workflows. And the reason for that is there's an immediacy and a recognition that people have for messaging these days that significantly transcends what you have with just a traditional or almost old-fashioned email message. My kids are 25 and 27. I think I'm the only person that they communicate to via email. Everything else they do is in some form of messaging platform. And the world is increasingly going towards a messaging-centric landscape. I mean, Jeff Lawson at Twilio says that the most valuable real estate on the smartphone is the messaging app. And we fully agree with all of that.
You answered the question before I was even able to get it out of what's the driver behind that growth. I do want to take another look at the revenue.
Yeah.
What is the model for enterprise and for the carrier?
So by that you mean the actual revenue charging model itself? Exactly. Yeah, sure. It's probably easiest to think of it not so much enterprise and carrier, but messaging and everything else. So let me start with the everything else. So that's global network services and outsourced carrier solutions. So there we've evolved over the last half a decade away from a pure unitary-based transactional type of almost a P times Q type of model. There, what we have these days is it's almost like your unlimited data subscription with your cell phone provider, right? It's big buckets of data consumption, bandwidth consumption, or transactional processing capacity for a fixed monthly recurring fee, and then with allowances, obviously, and then some overages to the extent that you exceed those allowances. Now, what we do with most customers is we don't actually price by the product either. We actually have product-based pricing in our price book, but what we typically do with most of our large customers in particular is we would give them a plethora of allowances across the products that they buy from us, all for one fixed price per month, with again then overages if they exceed the allowances on any given product. Okay, so we might charge somebody $500,000 a month, and they have like 7 to 10 different types of allowances all within that price point. And all of this is underpinned by multi-year, typically 2 to 3 year contracts for all of our carrier customers, each frankly with pretty robust auto renewal clauses, because if we come to the end of a contract and we can't agree commercial terms with the carrier, the last thing that carrier wants is for service to stop, because their world would go dark in a heartbeat. So that's kind of the charging model for most of carrier. And then messaging is different. So messaging is still charged by the drink, if you will. So it's a P times Q transactional-based pricing model. The basis of competition is we quote a transit fee, which is the fee that we earn for carrying the message, whether it's P2P or A2P, across our platforms. But then also, every time that we terminate the message within the carrier ecosystem, which obviously we have to do in order that the message gets through to the intended consumer, the carriers would charge us a termination fee. That termination fee is then passed through in its entirety, for the most part, to our customers. So for every message that we're carrying on behalf of a customer, we're charging them both the transit fee and the termination fee. And again, the messaging revenues are still underpinned by these 2 to 3 year kind of long-term commercial arrangements. And broadly, the way it works out is, I think, on average across all of carrier, it ends up being roughly 60-40 fixed versus variable, whereas in enterprise, which is almost exclusively messaging, it's sort of 85 transactional based, 15 some minimum recurring fees, because we do charge an element of recurring fees for access to our CPaaS platforms.
Now, you had mentioned a high retention rate with the contracts.
Yes.
And if those contracts aren't renewed, you said they're going dark. Realistically, what's the alternative?
That's a really good question. There aren't many competitors that we have to many of the products that we provide for our carrier customers. And the alternative is, if you're a carrier and you're intending to move away from us or anybody else for that matter, you've got to lay the groundwork pretty early in the process, because there's a lot of inherent stickiness and integration between our platforms and the carrier's platforms. So it's not a simple plug and play model. You couldn't decide tomorrow that a contract that you have with us that's expiring next week, you're going to move it to somebody else. What we do for the most part in carrier is very, very sticky.
Now, I want to start a company that directly competes with you. What's going to be the biggest challenge to break into this market?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that you want to know the answer, but I mean, there's two major challenges, quite frankly. Is first of all, you'd have to replicate the platforms that we have, and the single biggest thing to replicate there is the IPX network that we have, which, as I said earlier, is the largest private IPX network on the planet by some considerable distance. So that would take you hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and a lot of time to build the same kind of platforms that we have. Having said that, there are people out there, obviously, that have got deep pockets and prepared to be patient. So that in itself is not completely insurmountable. What's actually the more difficult aspect of the challenge is we've got this 30+ year heritage of carrying all forms of traffic for our carrier customers in an ultra secure, ultra reliable, ultra robust manner. And that gives us this trusted neutral intermediary positioning and great relationships within the ecosystem. So you then have to find some way of replicating those relationships, which is almost insurmountable.
So, I mean, this is layered. I'd have to have the financial backing in order to create this platform. And even if I had that, I certainly don't have the relationships to do it. Now, that does kind of tie into looking at Twilio. And I want to take a look at how did this relationship come about and what does it look like going forward?
Yeah, great question. So Twilio has been a good partner and a good customer of ours for pretty much 8 years now. They're what I would describe as being a very typical wholesale customer of ours. Twilio has got great technology. You could say that they've almost single-handedly stood up the entire CPaaS industry, and they very much focused on enabling really digitally savvy, if not completely digital native companies. So they've got great APIs, which if you're very digitally savvy, you can go onto the Twilio website, get those APIs, configure them to your own requirements, and then start generating messages. What Twilio doesn't have, which is why they already have an existing relationship with us, is much infrastructure to actually carry the messages that their APIs are generating. And certainly doesn't have the direct connections into the ecosystem that we have. Our IPX network gives us more than 800 connections for messaging traffic into the carrier ecosystem. And in particular, for 10-digit long code traffic, which I mentioned earlier, we're relatively unique in that we're the only major player that has direct connectivity into all of the North American carriers for 10-digit long code traffic. So Twilio wanted to ensure that their growth prospects weren't impinged upon by any limits on the supply or distribution of messaging traffic. So the main part of the rationale for Twilio was around the messaging distribution capability that we have, and ensuring that they have confidence and security, if you will, over the supply and distribution of messaging capability. So Twilio, we announced the transaction with them back in either late February or early March of 2021. They're going to invest between $500 and $750 million in the company. And once the transaction is closed here with MBAC, we'll also be activating the wholesale agreement that we have with Twilio. And that wholesale agreement has an obligation on Twilio to move in pretty short order the majority of their North American messaging traffic to us, following the close of the transaction, and that's for both short code and long code. So that, from our perspective, that's going to cause a major step function change in 2022 in terms of the annualized run rate of revenues that we're going to be generating from Twilio. And then in the proxy statement that we put out, we'd expect, we disclosed that we're expecting Twilio's revenue to grow at a pretty healthy clip over the next 2 or 3 years, pretty much in line with industry average trends for A2P messaging and CPaaS, and that we think they'll be a $200 million revenue customer of ours in 2025, which would, at that point in time, all other things being equal, that would mean that they would be roughly 15% of our revenue pool, and clearly our single largest customer.
The Twilio component has certainly garnered the most headlines, but are there any other strategic partnerships that we could look out for?
Well, we already have very long-standing relationships with pretty much all of the major carrier customers. We announced recently a couple of major product launches with some key carrier customers. So our Evolve Mobility product, which is something that we've developed that's industry leading within our carrier business, is being deployed as we speak by both AT&T and Verizon. And that's a triple win for them. I mean, if I was still a telco carrier CFO, our Evolve Mobility product would literally have me salivating, because what it enables is the more technically advanced carriers, they want to focus on 5G. So they want to be able to shut down their legacy 3G networks. If you're a couple of those carriers, that would cause a pain point for you, because a lot of the inbound roaming traffic that you generate or you benefit from today is still carried by 3G devices. So with our Evolve Mobility product, we can allow them to shut down their legacy 3G networks, generate OpEx efficiencies, more importantly from their perspective, repurpose the spectrum, right, the radio waves that they're using for 3G towards 5G, because many of the carriers are very spectrum limited on 5G. That's why they've just spent $100 billion in the US alone on C-band spectrum for 5G. But then by virtue of the fact that they put out Evolve Mobility product on their LTE and 5G networks, they still get to capture all of the inbound roaming traffic. So it's a triple win if you're one of these large, more technically advanced carriers.
So where you fit within the ecosystem, it sounds like your growth or your success is going to be predicated based on the carrier and the enterprise segments. What is that tectonic shift that that could happen that presents the greatest opportunity?
There's two big tailwinds that we're going to be able to take advantage of, which is, and we touched on one of them already, which is just this veritable explosion in all forms of enterprise messaging traffic. As corporates of all shapes and sizes increasingly lean on A2P messaging to drive their own digital transformations. So that's what's going to power the 25% or so CAGR that we've talked about within the enterprise segment. And then that's going to be further turbocharged, as we just touched on, by the relationship that we have with Twilio. The other thing is really going to be for the benefit of the carrier segment, which is the evolution from 4G to 5G, and in particular, when the carrier networks stand up what's known as standalone 5G networks. So within carrier, we're projecting over the next few years a 5 percentage point revenue CAGR. Very simply, you should think of that as being 1 point coming from the unwind of some COVID headwinds that we, like many other companies on the planet, have been dealing with over the last 18 to 24 months. The next 2 points is going to come from an explosion of data traffic, devices, and interoperability that's needed as the world evolves from 4G to 5G, much as we saw when we moved from 2G to 3G and then 3G to 4G. So you're going to have the same kind of volumetric explosion, and therefore significant increase in bandwidth consumption of all of our products and services. The final 2 points of carrier revenue growth is actually going to come from the new use cases that 5G enables. So again, this is things such as our Evolve Mobility product. It's blockchain-enabled clearing and settlement, which, again, we're leading the industry on. We're the only player that's got blockchain-enabled clearing and settlement fully deployed, live, and carrying real traffic for real customers. And not only does it allow us to do the existing clearing and settlement protocols in a more secure, much more efficient manner, but because of the inherent technology advantages, we can use that clearing and settlement technology to be able to monetize new types of use cases for our carrier customers. So, for example, within the carrier ecosystem, they talk about network slicing as being something that they want to deploy with 5G. Now, network slicing is very simply the ability to take a thin sliver of spectrum and dedicate it just for a particular customer or a particular use case at a particular point in time. So it's great technology. The carriers, the way their billing and provisioning systems work, they can't monetize that for themselves. I was talking with the CFO of one of our largest carrier customers about 2 weeks ago. And again, he was very attracted to our blockchain-enabled clearing and settlement because he understands that that can enable them to monetize network slicing, amongst other things. So blockchain-enabled clearing and settlement is certainly going to be a significant growth driver for us. And then we move into things such as IoT, rich communication services and rich business messaging, and finally, but by no means the last, private wireless networks.
You mentioned slicing to the end user.
Yeah.
Why is it appealing to them? Like, what's the benefit to them?
So it's just a different way of them going to market. So they can take, again, a thin sliver of spectrum, and they could dedicate that for let's say a customer had a particular use case and that required ultra low latency. So they could dedicate that spectrum just for that customer, and they alone would benefit from the ultra low latency that use case would enable. So, I mean, it's not a reality yet, but things that would require ultra low latency would be autonomous vehicles is one thing. The other thing, the other obvious use case of ultra low latency is if you were trying to do remote surgery using robotic techniques. So, and again, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The use cases for low latency devices is again going to explode over the coming years.
No, I think that really plays into the adaptability of your model, and it's not just this cookie cutter kind of archaic model going back.
Agreed, and we're leading the industry innovation in many regards here. As I said, nobody's got blockchain-enabled clearing and settlement. Certainly, nobody's got the evolved mobility product that we have, and we're also one of only 2 players globally right now that has the ability to run RCS, so rich communication services type of messaging.
Now, this also plays into some comments that you made. I was watching your ICR interview that I would encourage viewers to take a look at. You had mentioned that your IP is dramatically under monetized right now. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? We enable mission critical services for all of our carrier customers, and pretty much all of our carrier customers are orders of one, if not many orders of magnitude larger than we are. We generated $730+ million of revenue last year. A little more than half of which was in the carrier business, and we generated $210 million of EBITDA. I mean, some of the carriers that I've been CFO at, we've been generating $200 million of EBITDA per day, not per year. Having said that, we've got to be, I'm not saying that we're going to grow to be the size of a carrier, one of our carrier customers either, but there's certainly room to grow our revenue. But the key there is staying ahead of the innovation curve and really offering unquestionable value to our customers. We can't afford for our products and services to get commoditized and be taken for granted. So it's a question of always pushing the innovation envelope and offering much more for more, not just a little bit more for more. And that would be very accretive to our margin profile, because for the most part, we've got a highly leveraged business model in terms of operational leverage. Our platforms are almost infinitely scalable. So every single dollar of revenue that we generate, a disproportionate amount of that drops right through to EBITDA and therefore free cash flow.
With this opportunity, it certainly doesn't come without its risks. What do you attribute as the largest risk to be able to hit your goals?
I think I touched on this recently in some of the interviews and webinars you referred to. So it's all about execution for the most part for us. We spent the last 12 months or so working on the transaction, getting the company ready to be a public company again, putting in place clear strategy and executable action plans, supporting those strategies within both the carrier and the enterprise segment. So really it comes down to execution. And for that, again, it comes down to people and culture. We're only 1,500 employees. We've got a relatively thin employee base for the scale of revenues that we generate. Actually, we see the need to recruit a net 200, maybe as many as 250 people this year, which, in addition to the underlying attrition levels that we suffer from, which are no different to industry average, means that we're looking to recruit on a gross basis somewhere between 350 to 400 people this year. So that's a number which is almost 25% of our current employee base. So clearly a lot of effort on recruitment pipeline. And that's not just a HR thing. I mean, the business units have got to be ready to ingest that volume of people as well, and get them to work pretty much immediately. So we've got to be able to induct people at a pretty rapid rate, and then focusing very hard on the culture. We've done a lot of work on reinforcing and refreshing the culture and the values within the company in the last 12 months, and that's really starting to pay dividends too.
Now, you're a relatively new appointment as a CEO, and you just touched on the cultural aspect of this. What does that culture mean to you?
Look, I've learned through my career that culture is it's almost supremely important for long-term success. Some of the carriers I've worked in pay great attention to culture, and we're very, very successful. And I'd almost say as a direct consequence of that. So that's why we paid quite so much attention in the past 12 months to refreshing the culture. Because at the end of the day, and this goes back to what I alluded to at the start with my Japanese experience, I can have as much capability intellectually and with my own decision-making prowess as a CEO. But if you've got to be able to take an army of people with you. I mean, I can't make every single decision that's made every single day within such a fast-moving business as Syniverse. So you've got to get people enabled and empowered and motivated and confident to take all of those decisions, some of which are minute and microscopic, but really add up to a whole lot at the end of the year. So ensuring that we can take people with us on this journey is something that's been of huge importance to me.
Right. You're going to be doing a lot of hiring to help fuel this growth. Do you have the actual management or team in place to execute on this?
I have the senior leadership team in place. Absolutely. We've got great senior leaders within the business. And that's just not my own direct reports. I mean, we've got great capability within the organization, but we just don't have enough capability. So we're looking to add talent in sales, in product management, in marketing, in the commercial front end of the business. We've got a lot of work to do on the technology side. So we're again looking to add resource there. Same in operations, and same in all of the supporting and the enabling functions. So it's just a question really of having enough resource and enough capability to be able to really execute on the significant opportunities that we see in front of us.
And those opportunities that you see, could you walk me through what that looks like, or how that's going to unfold, whether it's a few months from now, a year, or a few years down the road?
Yeah, look, as I've talked about already, we think we're going to have 25-30% growth in enterprise revenues over the next few years. Solid growth, 5% or so within our carrier business, that's a great revenue growth rate sustainably within the carrier ecosystem. So what we're really going to see, though, if you looked at it more at a higher level, is we're in the middle of several years, maybe as much as a decades-long pivot from being a very roaming-centric business historically, where if I wind the clock back, say 5 years, probably 75% of our revenues were in some way, shape, or form driven by the roaming ecosystem, to one that's actually going to become much more messaging-centric over time. So again, in 5 years' time, we'll probably be generating maybe 75% of our total revenues from all forms of messaging traffic. So not just enterprise messaging, but also continued growth in P2P messaging within the carrier business. So that's really the major kind of secular trend that's happening, which you're going to see manifest itself through our revenue generation model, is going from being roaming centric to just being more more messaging centric, as all forms of messaging traffic continue to just take off.
I mean, this really highlights that you are the backbone of communications here. And what we find a lot is, especially as there's more and more SPACs within the space, that visibility becomes a difficult component. That's really not something that seemingly to me that you've had to struggle with, just because you've made a lot of headlines, you've been at the forefront, but why should those investors care going forward?
Yeah, look, I think you touched on it there, which is that we're not your stereotypical SPAC merger transaction. We're not promising to explore outer space and start up mining on Neptune in 5 years' time. We've got good financial scale today. 210 million of EBITDA, $733 million of revenue in 2021. A significant conversion of that EBITDA into unlevered free cash flow, and even an ability to generate positive free cash flow in 2021, despite a high annualized interest costs of $150 million. Going forward, we've guided towards a revenue number and an EBITDA number for 2022, which would imply strong double-digit growth rates year on year in those metrics. And obviously, when this transaction closes, we'll be refinancing the debt as well, and that will shave close to $100 million off of the annualized interest burden. So we'll be generating significant positive free cash flow on an annualized run rate basis going forward post this transaction. So we've got the financial scale, the visibility towards significant growth given the 5G and the messaging tailwinds that I've talked about. And we operate mission critical services and products right at the heart of the mobile ecosystem, which is really every single day is underpinning more and more the modern digital economy.
And you touched on the interest savings. As part of this transaction, what are the other benefits that this allows you to do?
Yeah, great questions. Look, as part of this transaction, a key focus was on delevering. So we're looking to raise just a shade over $1.1 billion of total new equity from a combination of Twilio, the PIPE, and the transaction with MBAC. So of that, we've already got over $1 billion fully committed, being the up to $750 million from Twilio and the $265 million fully committed PIPE. All of the equity proceeds, net of transaction fees, are going to go towards delevering the balance sheet. So we're going to be able to take net debt from just a shade under $2 billion to just shy of $1 billion. And then that, coupled with the refinancing and the significant reduction in the coupon, is going to result in the interest savings. So then that's going to allow us to either continue delevering going forwards, in which case everybody wins as we get to investment grade credit. That's a big win-win for both the equity and the credit investors, but also ensuring that we can invest appropriately in bringing new innovative products and services for both carrier and enterprise customers to market, and spin our innovation flywheel even faster, if you like.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to really educate me on how you're expanding the platform, what your strategic partnerships look like, and what the opportunities are unfolding, particularly in the messaging segment. I just want to thank you again for taking the time today.
Well, I got to say, it's been a pleasure talking to you as well, Daniel. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to chat, and it's been really great to talk to you about the really exciting future we've got ahead of us at Syniverse.